Over the weekend, Saudi Arabia hosted Ukraine-Russia peace talks without one key player, Russia. Senior officials from 40-some-odd other countries, including China, met to discuss Ukraine's proposed terms for surrender. However, according to reporting in Bloomberg News, the talks did little in making actual progress toward peace. Here to break down what we can actually glean from this weekend's discussions is retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. Welcome back, Lieutenant Colonel.
Hey, thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
All right, help us untangle this. First, let's start with the choice not to invite Russia to the peace talks. It seems like a pretty crucial party to this whole conflict.
Well, that tells you that they're not very far in this process, because before you can have literally scores of countries on one side against one on the other side, you've got to have a unified position, and they're far from unified. What Ukraine seeks to do is to get as much consensus as possible among, the Europeans, the global South, China, the BRICS, as many countries as they can, to try to get them to a unified position that's favorable to their side, so that then they have a large group to go negotiate with the one side on Russia. That's their objective. But it's going to be extremely difficult to obtain anything that's positive to the Ukraine side, especially given combat realities on the ground in Ukraine.
What at this point do you expect that Russia would be willing to accept in order to bring a halt to this conflict? Because as you note, the Ukrainian military situation gets worse and worse. That's not to say they haven't inflicted any damage on the Russian forces. Certainly they have, but Russia has a lot more it can bring to the table. Is there any sense that there's something that could actually be reached that Russia would be willing to end the war on their side?
There is, and Russia has been pretty consistent among saying that all the way back to the Istanbul meetings in March of 2022. And they said in the aftermath of this meeting, again, it's very similar, which is that the Ukraine side cannot be in NATO, needs to be non-aligned and neutral, and that the territories that Russia currently possesses will remain in Russian territory. And they said those are the ground realities. And until any discussions even talk about that, then it's a non-starter to even begin. And of course, the Ukraine side, at least on paper, says they still want to go back to the 1991 borders. But there was one crucial thing from this meeting that did seem to have an inch of progress, in that for the first time, Ukraine did not specifically say they have to have an outcome that Russia has to leave all of Ukraine before they can begin negotiations. So that's a tiny concession, but it's starting to get into the reality that will never be able to even start negotiations. And right now, Russia has no incentive to even talk about anything if the other side is not going to understand or accept their minimal terms, which is non-alignment and the current territories remaining in Russia. And until that happens, Russia will continue to fight. And if I can just point out, the big risk for Ukraine is that the longer they delay, even contemplating that, the greater the risk that they lose more territory in a final solution later.
Yeah, I mean, you referenced the conditions on the ground a little while ago. I'd like you to explain what it's looking like for Ukraine on the ground and what leverage what they have in these negotiations to be asking for the older borders, the pre-invasion borders.
Well, and one other thing that these negotiations exposed is that Ukraine government is finally belatedly coming around to recognizing they can't win on the ground militarily what they want to achieve politically. And, the Zelensky regime has been emphatic and adamant about, always saying we're going to win, we're going to get all of our territory back, and that's just how it's going to be. And of course, now they're realizing that it's not. So that's why they're willing to discuss it. They can't win on the battlefield, so now they're trying to win in diplomacy. But the reality is they have almost no leverage. I wouldn't say little, but they might not have any leverage right now, because all of the military fundamentals are favoring Russia. And every month that goes by, the balance swings even further in Russia's favor and against the Ukraine side. What this offensive has shown is that they took their last gasp, their best chance for any kind of territorial reacquisition that they spent literally half a year building, both in training new soldiers and in the equipment from the West, has completely run into a buzzsaw, and they have not attained anything of even tactical value, much less operational. And so now that they see that they won't have another offensive capacity for the foreseeable future, whereas Russia's side keeps building. And if Ukraine doesn't make a deal pretty soon, soon, they may find themselves losing even more territory as the military balance continues to tilt towards Moscow.
Yeah, could you game that out for us a little bit? Could we be at a place where, where the Russian military takes Kiev, where the actual government is threatened, where Zelensky is in a position to have to leave the country or be captured? Do you think that's something Russia, if that opportunity presents itself, that's something Russia is going to be interested in?
I think that probably the most likely near-term, at least objectives of the Kremlin, is to capture all of the Donbass and all of the territories, those 4 provinces that they illegally annexed last year, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and of course Crimea they still have. But they want to capture all of those. If they still don't get a deal after that, then I think the next target, and they're already starting to make preparations for this, are either Kharkiv in the north, the city of Kharkiv, or in Odessa. And they have been attacking their infrastructure in both of those locations to weaken them, so that in the event that they have, a surplus of personnel, which they have been training since at least October of last year, they conceivably could move in those directions. And I think that's what many of them desire to do. Whether they have the capacity remains to be seen. But I think that's the risk.
How much is the sentiment from the global community affecting these negotiations? We've been covering how BRICS, how the Global South has been, shall we say, less than enthusiastic about this particular conflict, or the idea that their resources should be affected at all by it. And in the United States, obviously, it's an election season where there is a significant portion that is right-leaning that wants to bring an end to this particular war. I'd say right-leaning partly because there is just nobody on the Democratic side who is giving voice to those kind of anti-war sentiments. Do you think any of that is affecting the timing now of what seems like an advancement in these negotiations?
I think all of it is, and even more so. You can add in among the Global South, you can add in Africa, because they are very adamant about wanting this war to end, and they aren't particularly concerned about how it ends. They just want it to end so that a lot of the food that they desperately rely on for their survival can get back to pre-war levels, because it's been very much cut as a result of all this for many reasons. Both from Ukraine and from Russia. So they want this to be over. Europe, mainly, at least on the public level, wants this to be over. China wants this to be over. Everybody wants this to be over, because nobody benefits from this in the majority of the world. And they want it to be over, especially in Europe. I think you're going to see the later this gets in the year. We dodged a bullet last year in that the winter was pretty mild. And so there wasn't a lot of the problems with energy and heating that we thought there might be. But a lot of those same problems still exist. And if it's a normal winter this year, there could be even more economic disruption and more trouble paying bills with higher heating costs, which could damage their economy further. And then you're going to see a much bigger push, I think, to make a negotiated settlement.
And what, if anything, should we understand from Saudi Arabia specifically hosting these negotiations?
I think Saudi Arabia and even China, to some extent, are continuing to try to flex their international muscles. And, Saudi Arabia has been trying to have rapprochement with Iran. They've been trying to negotiate things, especially with Israel as well. And they've been working with Russia, on the energy sector. So they have many motivations and many desires to bring this to an end and to raise their own process, their own heft in the process diplomatically, so that they come out looking better, because they want this to be over. They want the free flow of energy to flow, and they also want to be seen as improving. So they're taking this opportunity because they have relations with Russia. They also have relations with the West, and so they want to be seen as an effective broker, again, to raise their prestige even after this is over, because they would benefit in every direction. So I think that's why they're seeking to do this.
Mm-hmm. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you so much for joining us.
Always my pleasure. Thanks for having me.